I am myself not a nurse, but my older brother is. He sometimes told me stories of his work. Anyway, he worked at a hospice, very isolated from the world in a quiet, barren part of the state, and far away from the busy life of the city that we lived in. One night my brother was going through the lights out routine with 1 or 2 other nurses. He was taking the graveyard shift that day, so he signed in around 10 PM and was due to leave around 4 or 5 AM. He turned off the lights in the commons, and he and his co-workers checked in on the patients before bedtime. The routine goes as usual. He and his co-workers are in their office, doing paperwork or fiddling around on their phones and all that. Then, they hear a rumbling noise and some crying, which isn't unusual considering that it is a hospice. My brother and another nurse get sent to check it out. They walk through the commons and the hall, lit only by their flashlight, and investigate the room in question. My brother knocks on the door and asks the woman if she's okay, and that if she doesn't respond in 10 seconds with an answer, they will enter to help her. She replies by emitting the screams of the damned in hell. My brother and his partner nearly wet themselves and sprint back to the office. The screams stopped as soon as they entered. According to all other patients the morning after, they did not hear anything that night, and he does no longer work at that hospice anymore. I was working for the security team at a hospital, and an old guy came into the ER. He said he hated hospitals and he would not die in one. We were convinced for him to stay for his family's sake, but he was 100% adamant that he was going to leave the hospital before he died. Anyway, he lost consciousness and was moved to the ICU unit. His family came and visited, they got what they needed, they said what they needed, and they left to go get some food and meet with some guys from out of town that were just arriving. It was then that security got a call that the man had got out of his bed, walked towards the stairs or elevator, and was missing. The security office was right next to that area, and I was on break, so I was the first one on the scene. With nurses and security teams scattering, I started a search. We locked the place down, and there was no way he could have gone anywhere, but we did not find him. I went up to talk to the head nurse, and the other 3 nurses that saw him walk out, when a noise erupted from his bed. The machines went wild. He was crashing in his bed. Now, let me get something clear. Multiple witnesses saw him leave, yet he was laying there, crashing, dying. A code blue was not called, as he had a DNR. We still can't figure out how multiple people, including the nurses and a family member of another patient, saw him leave just a minute or 2 before actually dying. All I could think of was his dying wish not to die in that hospital. The hospital administrators told us that it's not the first time something like that has happened. I work as a teletech whilst I'm in school, and when the unit secretary leaves for lunch, I'll cover the desk at the same time since it's right outside the tele room. I was sorting the heart rhythm strips and someone walked up to the desk and said he was looking for the exit. I pointed in the direction of the exit right as I looked up to acknowledge him standing there and saw he was in a gown with a wristband. So I asked him for his room number and to wait here whilst I called his PCA to walk him downstairs. I called the PCA and gave her the room number. She told me,
"That can't be right. The patient died about 20 minutes ago. Was it his family?
I told her that he had a wristband on, but maybe I heard or was given the wrong number. She came to the desk to cover the monitors for me, and I went to go peek into the room he told me, just to see if it was the wrong room, and to find the room which he was in. Sure enough, laying dead in the bed was the same guy who walked up to the desk no longer than 10 minutes before I went in there. I work at an old military hospital. When I first started on the floor, someone told me how patients who stay at the end of the hall frequently see a little girl. I guess our unit used to be the paediatric part of the hospital. Anyway, one night I hear my patient screaming. He's awake, alert and completely oriented with absolutely no psych history. When I get to the room, I'm asking what's going on, and he just replies,
"A little girl just walked into my bathroom."
I'll be honest, I noped out of there. I usually work day shift, but had picked up night shift because they were short-staffed. We only had a handful of people working at night, so it was pretty quiet. So, I'm sitting at the far end nursing station, which is at the end of the back hallway. I hear a call light go off, which I remember thinking was quite strange because the resident who lived in that room had end-stage dementia and didn't move much. So, I go to the room and the blinds were moving and the patient looked like she was sleeping. I called her name and she didn't respond, which was her baseline, but then I put my hand on her shoulder and she was dead cold. I turned the call light off and turned the light on. She'd passed away from the coolness of her skin and stiffness. I think it had been a while. I then went to find a CNA to help with her. I also figured the blinds were moving because of our old heater that sat under the blinds. I go back to my desk to check the chart for funeral information, when all of a sudden the call light goes off again. At this point, I thought maybe the CNA was calling me to the room, so I walk up and down the hallway looking for them. I then cancel the call light from the nurses' station. There was no one around except for sleeping residents. I went to the front nurses' station when one of our CNAs was sitting reading a book. I told her what happened, and she said she'd been there the whole time. We head back down the hallway to find the light going on and off again, and the door shut. Maybe I had shut the door, and maybe the heater was still moving the curtains, but I never quite understood the call light. I truly believe she was letting us know that her soul was free from her body, and that she wanted to say goodbye to us. She was a long-term resident who never had visitors, and I truly think we're all she had at the end. I'm not a medical professional myself, but I did spend a lot of time in a hospice house last year, and I want to relate something that one of the nurses told me. I was there with my brother who'd driven overnight to be with my mum during her last days. She was still pretty lucid at that point, and I need to add that my mum died of colon cancer, so there was no dementia or anything that would have mentally impaired her. We were just sitting with her, talking quietly, even laughing a little with her. We were all okay in spirits considering the circumstances. Suddenly, she began slowly counting
1, 2, 3.
and pointing her fingers to a different spot in the room with each number. We of course asked her what was going on, and a nurse came to the room about the time. She'd gotten up to about
12.
by that point, and I'll never forget her response. "Just how many people are here? how did you and Andy get so many people here?"
And I know them all.
She actually looked so happy when she said that, and so pleased, as if we planned some kind of party for her. We just kind of smiled and nodded. The only people there were my brother and I, and the nurse. Later that day, the nurse took us aside and said this is a very common occurrence in hospice rooms. The patients see loved ones, usually all deceased, crowded at their bedsides. She said sometimes family members and staff see them too. I was taking care of an elderly patient. A very, very elderly patient. Actually, the oldest person I've ever taken care of. I don't remember why she was admitted, but it was minor and she was due to go home next day. She was awake and alert and a very sharp lady. She and I were having a nice little chat and I was getting ready to wrap things up when she said,
I just want to know who that little girl is who's standing behind you.
The hair on the back of my neck raised up. I ran through a quick assessment again. She knew who she was, she knew where she was, she knew what year it was, why she was in the hospital, and yet she was seeing invisible children in her room. What? I assure her that no one else is in the room with us. She was a bit confused and perplexed about it. So I go out to the nurse's station and have the "My patient is hallucinating ghost children, please help" conversation with my nurse in charge. And she goes,
Oh, your patient in room 26?
"Yes," I reply.
Oh yeah, I figured. She's the third or fourth person who we've had see the little girl in that room.
I was seriously freaked out. I was walking down the hallway and going into the cleaning utility room to get a warm blanket. Someone was walking about 6 to 8 feet ahead of me. I couldn't tell you anything about them or what they looked like, but I remember thinking it was a staff member. They opened the door to the room, which requires a punch code, and it shuts before I get to it. Mildly annoyed that they didn't even hold it open for me, I opened the door, and nobody is in there. I thought it was weird, but I didn't tell anyone about it or think much of it. Later that night, a co-worker and I were talking about the shift, and he said,
"Oh yeah, and now we have a ghost."
I asked him what he meant, and he went on to explain the exact experience. Only it had been told to him by another co-worker. Same hallway, same clean utility, same general feeling of it being a staff member, but he couldn't tell you any descriptive details at all. It has since happened to 3 or more people in the last year or so. I work on an adult oncology unit, where unfortunately we have a lot of comfort care patients. The majority of them will transition to hospices where they live out their final days. But sometimes they don't quite make it and pass away whilst they're still in the hospital. We have most deaths in the hospital on our unit, and a lot of floats don't like coming up to our floor because
Everyone dies.
we all love it though, and we wouldn't have it any other way. There's so much love between the nurses and our patients, and we really get to know them. When people pass, we've noticed that, unsurprisingly, it comes in threes. We'll go a few weeks with no one passing away. Most people will successfully make it out of there and go to hospices, only to have a week or two where we'll get about 3 to 6 deaths. Anyway, one week we had 2 patients pass away in one night. One of the patients was in room 8. She was really near and dear to our hearts, and it was a rough time for everyone involved. She'd been on our floor for a long period of time, and we watched her go from a spry old lady to basically wasting away in all aspects. She passed at night, and by the next day there was a new patient in her room. I was doing the new admission with the patient and going over the room orientation stuff. I explained that she had a one-stop shop remote which controlled the lights, TV, radio, and had the call light on. Right as I was finished explaining to her that the TV buttons are right here, I set the remote down on her bed, and instantly the TV turned on by itself. It began flipping through each channel at an alarming rate, faster than if you would just hold down the channel up button. She was a little older, and thankfully was not observant, and thought I was doing it. But no one was touching it. She says,
No thank you. I don't want to watch TV right now.
so I reached down and tried to turn it off. But it didn't turn off. I ended up panicking a bit inside and yanking the remote out of the wall and telling her that it seemed not to be working properly and that I'll get her a new one. The TV still wouldn't turn off after I unplugged the remote from the wall, and normally it would all be connected and not work if it wasn't plugged in properly. I ended up having to walk to the TV and manually shut it off. So I headed down there telling her I'd be right back, and when I went to the nurse's desk to grab another remote, I ran into another nurse. She was grabbing another remote too, which was odd. We just got a new shipment in as well, and they were all normally working properly. We rarely had to replace them anymore, and I asked her if the remote was broken too, and she said that hers was acting up. I asked her which room she was in, and it was another room that a patient had passed in the night before. The TV remotes were uncharacteristically acting up from across the wing at the same time in the same rooms that people had died in the night before. Freaky. The last place I worked, like so many other wards here in Denmark, had a 6-hour room where dead patients stay for 6 hours before they're checked again for signs of death and moved to the morgue. Not sure if this is a thing in other countries. The patients are required to have a call line within reach in case they wake up and are in fact not dead. So there are 5 or 6 call lines in the room. Anyway, it was an ER and we had a fair amount of dead patients wait in that room over the years. Every now and then, and usually during the night shift, the call light would go on from that room without any patients ever being there. You have to go down there to turn it off again, and sometimes they would turn off again by themselves just as you were leaving the room. Creepy as hell. I never liked going down there alone. The air was really thick and tense. Technicians came and checked the connections and stuff, but everything always worked perfectly without any problems. It's extremely weird. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's video, as these are some of my favourite types of stories. Please remember to like and subscribe if you want to keep up to date with my latest content. And also, if you have a story related to hospitals, or any story for that matter, I'd love to hear it. So why not share it in the comments or to my email in the description below, so that it can make its way into a future video. Lastly though, thank you so much for 800 subs guys. I'm really grateful to each of you for tuning in every time I upload. It really means a lot, and I'm glad so many of you are liking the content I make. And in case you missed them, here are some links to some of my other videos on screen now. Go on, give them a click. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Wishing you a great weekend, and I'll catch you in the next one.